The day after we were told the story of how Forense Jones disappeared, Ted and I did a lot of talking about where to go next. We were both haunted by the revelations of Randolph's tale, and even more so by the truth of his death some days before we met. Like me, my friend wanted to drop this just as much as I did, fearing that this whole thing would claim our sanity by the end, but I think we both knew it wouldn't be that simple. When he arrived back in my home the previous night, I reluctantly showed him the painting. I was apprehensive about it, not wanting him forced any deeper into the hole I'd buried myself in. He was a part of this now, whether I liked it or not. The door to the cabin in the picture was still cracked open when I pulled it from the basement to show him. I tried my best not to look at it, feeling my senses being pulled back in the second I wrapped my trembling fingers around the wooden frame. While Ted agreed that something was unsettling about the image, he didn't seem to be as enraptured by it as I was. He said that looking at it made him feel uneasy in a way, but nothing more than that. I didn't pry too much about any sensation of being dragged unwillingly into the haunting image, as I didn't want to come off any more nuts than I was feeling. Ted said he would look into this Dorian Black, the man whose final work seemed to be unraveling my sanity when he returned to work. He mentioned that it may end up a dead lead, given that some painters change their moniker for their work, just as writers do. With the fact that I do not write under the name Cameron McConnell, I had to agree on this. After some binge drinking and a little uncomfortable silence once I stashed the painting back in the basement, I suggested that we try to get some sleep. The following morning found us both quite groggy, the drinks we knocked back while discussing everything we had seen and heard, along with those facts making falling asleep no simple task. Parker Chase called again while we were eating some breakfast at a nearby diner, still discussing whether or not to let this go. It almost felt like the detective reaching out to Ted once more was almost on cue, as if to remind us that the lodge was not about to let us go. My friend looked troubled as he spoke with Chase, replying in single words after long moments of silence on his end. I was practically going crazy while watching Ted's expression drift through varying stages of anguish, with my imagination running wild over the possibilities. When he lay his phone back on the table, staring down at it like it had insulted him in some way, I was trying my best to be patient, to allow him a moment to process whatever Parker had told him. "What'd he say?" I asked after a few minutes, unable to hold it back any longer. "They found a puncture wound on the back of Randolph's neck," Ted said, his voice as distant as his blank stare. "The talk screen came back and he was poisoned, Cam. Randolph Jones was murdered." Jesus, who'd want to kill an old man? No telling. It wouldn't be the first time, you know. If there's one thing I've learned on the job, is that the sickos of the world don't always need a reason to kill. I could tell that his mind was in the same place as mine, and this was not some random crime, but somehow that the lodge had its hand in this. "I'm going to try to get some time off and head down there," Ted said, still looking mentally vacant. "I gotta get some answers, you know. I need to know if the story we heard yesterday is the truth. I gotta make sense of all this." "I can come along. I mean, no. You need to find out more about that painting. Even if I'm out of my jurisdiction down there, I can likely go places you can't. There's not much you'd be able to do around a crime scene. Please don't take this the wrong way, but it'd make things easier if it was just me." If I didn't know Ted as well as I do, I'd almost be inclined to think he was blowing me off, but I couldn't deny that he was right. Likely I'd just get in the way, going nuts while awaiting answers. While I wasn't exactly keen on the idea of being on my own again, with all that's been happening, his logic held up. We could potentially get more answers if we split up. "I'll swing by the office and see if I can get a few days off, and I'll look up the painter if I get a chance," Ted said when we arrived back at my home. "I'll call you when I know something." Over the few days leading up to Ted heading down to Kentucky, we looked into a few things. While his initial search on one Dorian Black came up short, I had done a little internet browsing on the man. There were a variety of sites he had posted his art to online, some images of his work and a quick bio about the guy, but there was little information about who he was in life. It took me some digging, but I finally managed to track down the obituary of Simon Dorian, the birth name of the artist in question, linked on a forum discussing his work. He had a small but passionate following, many of whom were quite gutted about his passing. The obituary itself contained only the relevant information. that Simon Dorian, son of Leslie and Jean, born in Antrim County, Michigan, had died at the age of 32 on October 17th of last year. While that didn't tell me much, it didn't take long to find an article concerning the apparent suicide. According to the link, Dorian was found hanging by the neck in the living room of his home he shared with his girlfriend, Penelope Slate, just a few miles from the shop in which I discovered his work. From what his girlfriend of 3 years said, Simon had been in a bit of a rut those past few months. After a bout of some brutal artist block, something I can very much relate to, he began to produce a number of very disturbing paintings. While the article didn't get into the specifics of these works, it would seem that his girlfriend had grown quite concerned about his fragile mental state, recommending that he seek out some kind of help. While she hated to leave him alone during this time, she didn't have the luxury of working from home like he did. She'd often find him fully immersed in one painting or another when she would return. That inspired me to look more into the work he had posted online, though most of it was just digital art, as opposed to the painting, which was his greater passion. There were plenty of fantastical and imaginative pieces, beautiful fantasy-inspired landscapes, and stylized, brightly colored abstract work, but nothing especially jarring to the senses. From what I could tell, though, he hadn't published anything on the internet since around 6 or 7 months before he died. Ted looked him up again once he had his real name to go on, finding nothing more than some fines for graffiti a good decade ago, and an instance of underage drinking when he was 17. The driver's license picture he pulled up showed a slender man with a pale complexion, shoulder-length, dirty blonde hair, thick beard stubble, dark eyebrows, and bright green eyes. He looked about as content as anyone could in such photographs, likely exhausted from waiting in line for his turn to renew, uncertain whether to smile or remain neutral. The image was from a good 2.5 years before his suicide, so perhaps whatever personal demons pushed him over the edge hadn't taken root just yet. When I drove my friend to the airport for his flight down south, where Detective Chase was set to pick him up on arrival, I grew silent, the memories of our last visit to the place still haunting me. I could tell that Ted felt the same, unable to put into words how to rationalize meeting up with people who were not really there. "You think I should flash my badge and try to get a peek at the security footage from that day?" Ted asked as we walked towards the terminal. "I don't know, man. Would that be crossing any lines? I don't want to get you into any more trouble." We both left it at that. I suspect we were on the same page, apprehensive about what any footage may show. I'm not sure if my still-reeling mind could handle the sight of us standing in the bustling terminal conversing with nobody. It may honestly be worse if it did show Chase and the deceased Randolph Jones. Yeah, if that were the case, it would give us some concrete proof that a dead man had somehow arrived that night. What would that mean, really? As it was, I felt like I was teetering on the brink of madness, uncertain what was real anymore. The last thing I needed was to take one step closer to a padded room in a straitjacket. When Ted boarded the plane, I headed back into town with my head floating somewhere alongside him. I planned to head back to the pleasant little shop in which I had purchased the eerie painting, but not until I was in a better frame of mind. I wanted to learn more about Dorian from someone who actually knew the guy, but I didn't want to come off like a nutcase to the lovely Betty Morrison either. Sure, I shouldn't be thinking about any sort of potential romance with everything else going on, nor did I even know if the attractive shop owner was involved, but hey, I'm a guy. What can I say? Even faced with the most bizarre circumstances, a pretty girl has a way of setting some sort of seed in even the most otherwise occupied of minds. I ended up settling on heading back to my house after a brief stop-off at the local post office. I maintained a P.O. box for any mail related to my pen name, mostly to keep a certain degree of anonymity at home. I'm not especially well known, but I have a decent, if somewhat humble, following. Even if my work should somehow blow up exponentially, I never liked the idea of not being able to enjoy a meal in peace, so I try to keep the two sides of my identity as disconnected as possible. There were a few friends I had made over the years through some of the places I post my work to, along with a handful of books I've released, but many of them only know me by my writing name. Ted is a rare exception given that we live in the same town, along with the mutually beneficial nature of his work. Sure, when I would regularly hit him up for research purposes and the like, it could be argued that I benefited from this far more than he did. But he enjoyed the brainstorming process as much as I did during those times until his supervisor put his foot down. I still consider him a dear friend, and though I still feel awful about dragging him into this, I do feel a lot better with him by my side. With a handful of letters and 2 packages in hand, I left the post office and headed back to my home, hopeful that opening my mail may prove enough of a distraction to get my head straight. When I arrived, grabbing a cold soda from the fridge and flipping on the television, I dropped onto my couch, groaning from the tension in my back and neck. The TV provided some ambient background noise while I tore into my letters, my mind still not fully escaping the bizarre events of the last weeks. One of the packages was from a friend overseas, a book they had tracked down concerning some Finnish folklore I'd expressed interest in researching for a story. Flipping through the pages brought a smile to my face and a much-needed topical shift to my mind. When I absent-mindedly reached for the other parcel, glancing at the TV to see the burnt man in the striped sweater having successfully lured another unsuspecting teenager into his nightmare, I let out a sigh from the tension in my neck having finally eased. I pulled up the box on my lap, my eyes still fixed on the screen and a smile on my face at the wonderfully campy 80s horror movie. I can't even tell you how many times I've watched this one, but it never got old. Whether or not I'll be able to view it again with the same glee on my face, though, I can't honestly say. You know how music has that indescribable ability to send your mind back to a vivid memory, providing a soundtrack to whatever emotion you felt at the time? These old slasher movies had such catchy and creepy themes. This one in particular will probably forever be associated with seeing that damned image that my mind had almost escaped from for the briefest of moments, peering up at me from the splayed open cardboard box. Strangely, I could tell right away that this was not the same copy of the book that was pulled from my passenger seat in the night. The dust jacket was just as worn and scratched, perhaps more so than the one I had purchased from the back alley book peddler. As little time as I had spent in the company of that copy, I had grown familiar with just about every blemish. When my trembling fingers pulled open the cover, the numbers reading 34 of 42 were the second thing my eyes met. The first was the red bookmark with the words, "We need to talk," handwritten in black ink. I flipped it over, which was no simple task with my hand shaking so much, to see a time and date of the apparent meeting at which I may have that conversation with the anonymous gift giver. At 7:00 p.m. the day after next, whoever had sent me this would be apparently waiting my arrival at the Blue Moon of all places. Now I check my P.O. box maybe once every couple of weeks. What are the odds that I would feel the urge to swing by there just a couple of days prior to this appointment? I tried not to dwell on yet another bizarre coincidence, focusing more on who could have sent the package in the first place. While briefly worried that it may be the too unsettling dark-haired man wanting to have that little chat with me again, the fact that it was not the same copy of the book they had stolen from me left me downright stumped on who it could be. Of course, I had no proof that it was indeed them who broke into my car in the first place. It made the most sense at the time, given how intent they seemed on discussing the book when they joined me in the restaurant. The things that made sense seemed a little more elusive of late. Whatever the case, be it those haunting individuals or someone else who was somehow a part of this madness, I wanted to find out. I planned to discuss this with Ted the next time we spoke, hopefully bringing some news about what happened with Randolph Jones. But for the time being, I was intent on showing up for this meeting, if nothing else but to find out who it was with. After some time spent with my mind wandering somewhere far beyond the confines of my home, I understood that I would not be fully escaping this mindset anytime soon. With that in mind, I thought it to be as good a time as any to head back to the shop in which I purchased the eerie painting. Maybe enjoying the company of Miss Betty Morrison would be enough to distract me from this, even if I was headed there to further look into her friend Dorian. Either way, I just hoped I wouldn't end up making a fool of myself while trying to avoid sharing too much of the insane events that had inspired me to investigate the deceased painter. God knows I didn't want to drag her into this craziness as well. It didn't take me long to reach the shopping center at which I had first met both Betty and the detective my friend was potentially getting for some answers from by this point. By my reckoning, he should have touched down in Kentucky a good hour ago, but I planned to send him a text soon. I thought it best to let him settle in a bit before attacking him with questions, though. When I walked into the shop to see a variety of customers idly walking around the place, I saw no sign of the lovely Miss Morrison. The tall, well-built man with short-length, wavy dark hair and a smooth shave standing behind the counter almost caused my heart to sink a little. Whether he was just an associate or an employee of the shop's owner, or what I momentarily feared, the boyfriend or husband I hadn't thought to inquire about the last time I was here, I couldn't know. Whatever the case, one fact seemed undeniable. I would not be talking with Betty today after all. "Hi," I said, awkwardly approaching the counter. "Is Miss Morrison around by any chance?" "I'm afraid she's out of town for a few days," the man said in a light but deep voice. "I can take a message if you'd like." No. It's okay. I just wanted to talk to her about the painting I bought the other day. Well, the one who painted it anyway." "You're the guy who bought the gateway," he said, a smile reaching across his lips. "The gateway? Nah, this is a cabin in the woods? It may be..." "That's what Dorian called it. He gave a title to all of his works. I never really understood why he called a cabin something like that, but that's the one." "So, you know Dorian as well?" "Oh yeah, not as well as Betty, but we all go way back. Broke her heart when he passed." "Oh," I said, my heart sinking a little more. "So you've known Betty for a long time then? Are you, her husband? Boyfriend, maybe?" "I'm her brother," he said, laughing at the way that just screamed, "I know what you're after, buddy boy." "We all went to school together. I was a couple of grades ahead of her and Simon, but he spent a lot of time at the house. My name's James." "James?" I said, shaking the hand he offered. "Jim Morrison, huh? I love your music."
Yep,
he said with a sigh, clearly having heard this before.
"That's sort of how we came up with the name for the place. I'm more the silent partner, while Betty runs it for the most part, but we started it up together."
Though I'd previously paid no attention to the name of the shop, I now noticed the sign above the counter that matched the one on the exterior wall. The other side definitely fit, given the moniker of one half of its owners. Hopefully nobody feels the urge to break on through to the other side," I said, joining him in a chuckle.
"Yeah, I hope they don't light my fire either."
For a second, I felt my distracted laughter catching in my throat, my mind flashing back to the blaze that consumed the bookshop, but I shook it off to the best of my ability. The last thing I wanted was for this guy to think I was some kind of weirdo, especially with my all-too-obvious desire to get to know his sister better.
"So what did you want to know about Dorian?"
he asked, still smiling. It wasn't until this point that I realized I hadn't planned this far ahead. In a nutshell, I wanted to know specifically what inspired him to paint that same damned image from the dust jacket of the book, but I wasn't entirely sure how to approach that without coming off like a bit of an oddball. "I guess anything you feel comfortable sharing. I'm a writer myself, so it's always fascinating to me how an artist's mind works in different mediums. I suppose I'd just like to know a bit about the guy, especially with how incredible his work is." It almost felt like a cop-out statement, just a blanket "who is this guy?" but I hoped it would at least ease into things I really wanted to know, specifically the subject of his final work.
"He was always quiet, Simon. His home life was a bit of a wreck during his school years, so he wasn't the most social back then. Betty took to him pretty quickly when they first met, him being the new kid. They were sweet on each other for a bit, but that just turned into friendship after a while. He told her once that he loved her too much to be in a relationship with her, whatever that meant, but she seemed to understand what he was getting at."
"Was he always an artist? Like, even back then?"
"Oh yeah. It was all he'd talk about. He'd get old to me fast when he was hanging out at the house, but Betty lapped it up like a thirsty dog. She's more musically inclined, plays the cello, some guitar, and ukulele, but she says art is art, no matter if it's on a canvas or the strings. I wouldn't know much about that, though. I love listening to music and looking at art, but I wouldn't know a thing about making it."
"I guess that's the nature of things. If anyone could do it, it wouldn't be all that interesting," I said, hoping to speed the conversation along. "So, I don't mean to pry, but, what happened? How did he, I didn't want to fully reveal that I'd been almost obsessively looking into how he died, but I hoped it wouldn't be crossing any lines by veering the conversation this way.
"Yeah, Simon had been going through some stuff towards the end. Apparently it was suicide."
"Oh my god," I said, faking my best impression of someone shocked by a revelation. "Why? I mean, what led him to that?"
"I couldn't tell you personally. He'd still come by the shop or the house on occasion over those last months, but mostly Betty would head to visit him and Penny, his girlfriend. She had introduced them a few years back, Penn being a college friend who moved out this way. They both got concerned with how distant Simon had grown, but they didn't think he'd go this far.
Did they have any idea what drove him to that?
That I couldn't tell you. All I know is that it messed Betty up. I think she cried for a solid week when... It may be best for you to talk to her about this stuff. I mean, I knew the guy well enough, but I don't know about what inspires or breaks down the artists of the world.
I was a little less than thrilled that this got me no closer to the truth of things, but I couldn't argue with Mr. James Morrison. It likely would be best to hear this from someone who knew the guy better. Not that I needed any extra reason to chat with his sister more, but if I didn't get any answers soon, my already exhausted mind may explode any second.
How about you leave your number and I'll have Betty call you when she gets a chance, he said.
Yeah, that works, I replied. He handed me a pen, sliding an open notepad across the counter.
She's single, by the way, he said with a smirk as I slid the book back to him.
Oh, I didn't mean to...
She might have more than just mentioned the guy who bought the painting. You left quite an impression on her.
Is that right? I asked, trying to sound more casual than the excited teenager dancing around in my head.
I'll tell her you stopped by, he said, holding his hand out again. She'll be back in a few days, but if I hear from her before then, I'll let her know you were looking for her.
Thanks, I said, shaking his hand. It was nice to meet you, Jim Morrison. Stay safe, man. You know, people are strange.
Yeah, especially when you're a stranger.
He chuckled as I walked to the door, a smile etched into my previously unsettled face. Though my quest for answers hadn't been satiated by my visit to the other side, I ended up with a most welcome distraction. Perhaps, given everything of late, this is what I needed far more than some more puzzle pieces to play with. As I opened the door to my home after driving back with my head in the clouds again, Ted's familiar ringtone jingled from my pocket. It looked like the report was falsified, he said, sounding somewhat defeated. Jones died of natural causes, a heart attack in his sleep. Huh? Why would anyone... It seems to be just another dead end. No pun intended. There's not much more I can do down here, jurisdiction and all, so I'm gonna catch a flight back tomorrow morning. The line was pretty staticky, making it a little more difficult to hear what he was saying, but the news of essentially no news made me sink into my chair feeling deflated again. Still, be it from exhaustion or just having traveled all that way for nothing, Ted didn't sound like himself at all. What about the story Randolph told? Did Chase let you see the tape? Yeah, they wouldn't let me see much else, but I got that at least. So was it? It was just like he told it. Well, whoever told it, you know. Almost verbatim. What about Chase? Did you tell him about? I'll send you a text when I know the time and flight number, he said, cutting me off once again. Will you be able to pick me up? Yeah, I'll be there. Maybe we should try to get a look at the airport security footage after all? You think? Alright, man. I'll hit you up when I know something. With that, the line went dead. Well, it wouldn't be difficult to chalk up my friend's attitude to being drained from this experience. I had the strangest feeling he wasn't telling me everything. He was never one to be so short in a conversation unless he was overly excited about something. He could be like an enthusiastic kid sometimes, getting carried away when his story took root in his mind. But this wasn't like him at all. Maybe I was just looking too deeply into just about everything of late, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with him. It was very possible, of course, that if I had static on my end, he may have had a hard time hearing me too. I continued trying to distract myself over the following hours, resisting the urge to fish a beer from the fridge. I halfway wondered if the amount of booze I'd been knocking back these past few weeks had taken a toll on my mindset. I just grabbed a chilled soda and tried to kick back and relax, surfing Netflix in search of anything to send my scattered brain anywhere else. A few hours later, as Ted had said, I received a message with the flight information. I replied, asking about trying to check out the footage at the airport again, getting a dismissive, "Maybe, I'll see you tomorrow," in response. Again, I tried to chalk it up as nothing to worry about. Perhaps the lateness of the hour, the exhaustion of the day, and getting no answers after traveling so many miles had him feeling a bit down. It made enough sense to allow me to push aside my concern for the most part. The book I had gotten in the mail still sat on its box in the couch, but I wasn't about to get pulled into that again. I even avoided the other package like it was sitting too close to a giant spider or something. With my mind battling to distance itself from anything unsettling, I caved in and grabbed a beer from the fridge. I needed to settle down my erratic thoughts, even if another hangover may be awaiting me in the morning. When I woke a bit later than I intended the next day, I had just about enough time to grab a quick lunch before heading to the airport. Hopefully for the last time. Well, the last time related to this damned investigation anyway. As I sat waiting for my friend, gazing blankly through the window, my phone's vibration almost caused me to jump. I've been so on edge lately that any distraction, even planes drifting across the runway, was enough to leave me completely zoned out from the world around me. Why the sight of an unknown number on the screen of my device caused my hand to tremble again, I can't say. It's not like I'm not fairly constantly plagued by relentless telemarketers intent on offering me a better deal on my car insurance or to sell my home for a remarkable deal. I was almost paralyzed as I gazed at the phone. When I felt a tap on my shoulder, I almost jumped out of my seat, fumbling to keep my phone from hitting the floor. I hadn't even noticed the new arrivals walking through the gate, let alone my friend strolling up to where I sat, looking almost exhausted. "You alright, man?" I asked, tucking my phone back into my pocket and grabbing one of his bags to lend a hand. Didn't sleep much last night. "Did anything happen?" No, I just tossed and turned. Crazy dreams, you know. I think this thing is getting in my head. Yeah, I know what you mean. With that, we headed for the exit. I thought about pushing the idea of checking out the footage again, but I could tell that Ted was not remotely in the mood. If nothing else, I hope that this experience may allow him to step away from this completely. As much as I felt more at ease having him by my side on whatever was going on here, I still felt awful for bringing him into it. While I was quite aware that I no longer had a choice in seeing this through to whatever end it had in store for me, I wouldn't ask any more of him. We didn't speak much as we headed back to my place where his car was still parked. I had questions I would love to be answered, but with what he had said on the phone, he had no answers to give. After a little small talk upon arriving at my home, Ted gave a tired goodbye, heading to his car and back to his house. I considered recommending that he stick around long enough to at least get some sleep, but I wasn't about to force it on him. I know all too well how someone's sanctuary can help set a troubled mind at ease. I didn't tell him about the little information I had learned about Simon Dorian. If anything, I avoided the topic of the lodge completely, hopeful that he may indeed see fit to get back to his normal routine. Though it was only early afternoon, my body felt as though I had hiked up one side of the mountain and down the other, my head softly pounding with a dull ache. At some point, while I rubbed my temples in an attempt to fend off the oncoming migraine, I passed out in my cozy chair, my pulsing heartbeat providing a soft lullaby. When my phone vibrating in my pocket pulled me back to awareness, I was momentarily foggy and a little lost. With my vision still blurry from being half asleep, my eyes blinking rapidly as I slipped the phone from my pocket, my weary chest began to thump at the unfocused sight of that same unknown number glaring up at me from the screen. It felt irrational to be so worked up over something as trivial as a random phone call, but I had the strangest feeling that I shouldn't answer. As it was, my curiosity ran ahead of my common sense, swiping my thumb upwards, holding the device to my ear and uttering a drowsy, "Hello?" Hi. Is this Cameron?" a familiar voice said. Yeah, it is. Chase? Parker Chase? Is everything alright?" "That's what I'm hoping you can tell me," he said in a slightly nervous voice. "I couldn't get in touch with Ted. It took me a bit of searching to find your number, but I wanted to check in and see if everything was okay." "Huh? Yeah, I picked him up a few hours ago." "Picked him up? What happened?" "Yeah, from the airport," I said with a perplexed chuckle. "The airport, but that's what I'm calling to ask you about. I waited for him at the airport here, but he never showed. I didn't hear anything from him, and he didn't answer when I called to check in, so..." "Wait. What? Back up a bit. He didn't show?" I said, rubbing my sleepy eyes, attempting to wrap my mind around what he was saying. "I dropped him off yesterday. I watched him board the plane. How could... He didn't show?" "Yeah, I still waited for him for a while after his plane touched down. When everyone cleared out, the flight crew said that nobody else was on board. Tried to call him a few times even after I headed back to the office, but..." "Are you absolutely certain he boarded?" I mean, he walked through the gate with the other passengers. He called me from out your way yesterday. He said that you wouldn't let him cross the yellow tape due to his lack of jurisdiction. He said he saw the autopsy report that Randolph died of a heart attack. How could...
No, that's not right. Randolph was poisoned. The case is still ongoing. Honestly, I shouldn't even be telling you this much, but there were clear signs of a break-in, Cameron. Ted never arrived in Kentucky. He did not see any report, nor did he even come close to the crime scene.
And where the hell did he go? I asked, almost to myself. This doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't,
Chase said, his voice sounding as unsettled as mine. Let me see if I can get in touch with him, I said, already getting to my feet in preparation to head to his home if he wouldn't answer the phone. I'll see what I can find out and call you back when I know something.
I can try to head to you, but I don't know if I can with this case.
No, there's no need for all that. You keep doing what you can on that end, and I'll get to the bottom of this here, I said, choosing not to get into what happened last time we made these same plans.
What aren't you telling me?
Chase said, sounding slightly apprehensive. Nothing that makes sense. Not yet. I'll call you back when I know something. He seemed reluctant to let it go at that, but didn't argue. I almost dread to think what he thinks may be going on here, but I couldn't even begin to rationalize any of this. The only thing that made any sort of sense was that Ted had gotten off the plane, perhaps hiding out until I left, but why would he do that? Not only that, but if he never boarded the plane, why perform this charade of having me pick him back up at the airport? None of this was adding up to me in any way, but I had to get to the bottom of it. I had to know if my friend was alright. It didn't surprise me when he didn't answer his phone, but I wasn't about to leave it at that. I had already snatched up my keys before I called him, heading to my car. My thoughts were all over the place as I drove to his house, my heart once more threatening to beat through my sternum. I had no doubt by the time I pulled into his driveway that somehow the lodge had set its seed in his mind, entrancing him as it had Forense Jones. Of course, I still couldn't take for granted that Randolph's tale was the truth of things, as Ted had clearly lied about seeing the tape. Whatever the case, Jonesy was indeed seduced by the damn place, regardless of how exactly he ended up there. I pounded on my friend's door, praying to the gods that he would answer and somehow prove all of this was some just bizarre misunderstanding. With every minute that passed with my knocking garnering no response, I grew more terrified that a red glow had emitted from this very door when the owner of the house returned home. I ran around to the back, hoping that the rear entrance may be unlocked, but as I rounded the corner, my heart skipped several beats when I saw Ted standing on the back deck, just glaring out into the night. I called out his name, unsurprisingly getting no reaction from the seemingly mesmerized detective. I sprinted around to the other side, taking the steps up to the patio 2 at a time, shaking my friend by the shoulders when I reached him. "Snap out of it, man," I said, my panic inspiring me to slap him across the face. "Do you see it?" he said, his voice as distant as his eyes. "See what, Ted?" I said, following the trace of his stare. "There's nothing out." My words caught in my throat when my eyes met what had his undivided attention. My friend's home sat on several acres of land, with nothing around, other than some woods 100 yards or so from his oversized deck. That was normally the case, anyway, before the mysterious cabin had somehow erected just a little ways behind the tree line. I was still transfixed by that ominous crimson glow beyond the row of thick trees when my friend began to lazily pace towards the steps, already making it halfway down them before I allowed my periphery to notice him having left my side. "Ted, don't!" I called out, running towards him as he reached the foot of the stairs. I tried to hold him back when I reached him, but he wouldn't let up. He just marched towards the trees and that haunting glow within them. I refused to look to the path ahead, certain that I would be entranced if I did, as I had been on the patio. I felt it pulling me in so much more powerfully than the pages of the book or the soft brushstrokes of the painting. Ted pushed past me when I attempted to block his path, effortlessly butting me to the side without a second glance. His gaze was transfixed by his goal, which he drew closer to by the second. "Please," I begged, doing everything I could to stop him, even striking him across the face, but it didn't even faze him, even with the blood leaking from the lip I punched. He didn't speak a word as he pushed onwards, his arms hanging like wet noodles at his side, and his eyes wide and unblinking. "Wake up, damn it!" I shouted, thrusting my fist into his gut, almost hoping he'd hit me back just to get any sort of reaction out of him.
We were at the tree line before I knew it, none of my attempts to reach him garnering the slightest reaction. The lodge had him, body and soul, but I wasn't about to give in. Over and over I punched and punched, begging him to stop. I kicked his shins and even attempted to wrap my leg around his to trip him, only succeeding in dropping me to the ground in the process. I could feel the door cracking open before I heard the creak of its hinges, an ambient hum accompanying the crimson aura bleeding across and through the grass. I couldn't stop myself from turning to face it, my senses instantly enraptured by the sight of the far less diluted version of the illumination that shadowed the slender form of Jonesy back at the bar. The back of my mind was screaming out in an anguished howl, begging the forefront, which had already fallen prey to the alluring vision before me, to run. I felt my hands lazily bouncing against my hips as I paced closer, just behind the friend I no longer attempted to halt. It was drawing us both in, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to resist it. I wanted to enter. I wanted to witness its wonders. When Ted's foot met that first creaky wooden step, my racing pulse and terrified subconscious finally registered what was happening, thrusting that fear against the inner walls of my mind like a drunk driver crashing into a thick and ancient tree trunk. "No!" I screamed, my voice barely registering above the vibration emitting from inside that vibrant glow. "Ted, for God's sake, stop!" With one foot already crossing the threshold, his body halfway through the gateway to whatever madness lay within that cabin, he stopped in place, turning to face me with wide and tear-filled eyes. "Cam?" he said, sounding truly confused by his surroundings, his head suddenly jerking from side to side. "What's going on? Where?" Both his words and my heartbeat were swiftly cut short when the door slammed shut, pinning him between this world and the other. Our shared screams blended together as the wooden boards beneath our feet shuddered violently, as though the earth was trying to swallow the building whole. With Ted shrieking an agonized wail, the sound of his bones cracking and splitting like dry-rotted twigs and branches surrounding the cabin, I ran my shoulder against the door with every ounce of strength I could muster. Blood streamed down the door, attempting to force itself shut, the wooden frame tearing into his flesh. No matter how hard I forced against the damn thing, it still pushed back, desperately trying to close, with Ted's howls reaching an almost deafening magnitude. When my feet began to slip from the crimson pool widening around them, I stumbled against the door, my arm sliding across the wood into whatever lay beyond it. In that instant, as I felt an indescribable warmth caressing my fingers, as though they were being embraced by the hand of God itself, the pressure released, and the door swung open once more. Ted and I both fell to the no longer trembling floor, that aura now surrounding us both, almost tempting me to leave him behind and stroll in as though I hadn't a care in the world. Before I could allow it to enrapture me again, I dragged Ted back from the entrance, not stopping and not looking back. When I reached where the trees had parted to allow the cabin to construct itself in the otherwise dense woods, I finally took a reluctant glance back. My jaw unhinged when my eyes met only more trees, with no trace of what had tried to split my friend in two. Ted had lost consciousness some time before the ambulance arrived, but that was most definitely for the best. He was soaked in so much of his own blood I can't even imagine the amount of pain he was in. They rushed him into surgery as soon as we reached the hospital, while I tried to figure out how I was going to explain any of this. Ultimately, I told his colleagues, who showed up soon after we did, that I had found him like this after being unable to reach him on the phone. If nothing else, the records of my calls should prove at least that much. My only concern at the time was Ted. I barely even considered what would happen if they didn't believe my story. My knuckles were still a bit swollen from my attempts to hold him back, but I was so drenched in his blood they didn't even give it a second look. Fortunately, I'm pretty familiar with many of Ted's associates, and I'd like to think that they know I would never be capable of anything like this. That was far from my focus at the time, of course, but it was still there. Once my statement was taken, I was left alone in the hospital waiting room, desperately hoping for some news on my friend. I don't even know how long it had been after I nodded off on that uncomfortable chair when someone shook me awake. The doctor who pulled me from my haunted dreams informed me that Ted had made it through the surgery, though he wasn't out of the woods just yet. That phrase inspired my neck to spasm a bit, my mind flashing back to what led us to this, but I tried to push it aside.
The sun was beaming down from outside, but I was still shocked to hear that the operation had lasted around 10 hours. According to the surgeon, just about every bone on Ted's left side had been crushed, 3 ribs having penetrated his lung. The shoulder blade, collarbone, hip, and femur had sustained significant damage, along with several of his organs. He didn't specify how many stitches had been required to seal his flesh back together, but it was a lot. Although he was in a comatose state, even if he should survive the next 24 hours, he may be in need of a few transplants. The doctor is hopeful that he may survive this, but he said he would rather state the worst-case scenario to prepare for it. I suppose I can't blame him for that, but it doesn't help my nerves on the subject. However things go from here, if Ted makes it through this, he may have some degree of an altered lifestyle. The doctor wouldn't get into what may lie ahead for my friend if he does pull through, claiming that it's far too early to even consider his potential rehabilitation. So that would be added to the ever-growing number of things weighing on my mind. I still hadn't left the hospital when night fell on the following day, aside from the ride one of Ted's friends gave me to pick up my car. I wasn't allowed to see my friend just yet, but I couldn't leave him alone, even if it was indirectly. Honestly, I wasn't ready to be alone myself, even if I was only surrounded by those random visitors to other patients coming and going. When a very tired-looking nurse told me that I could visit him for a moment, I was both excited and apprehensive. My whole body was trembling when I walked into the room. The sight of Ted with half of his body in casts and bandages, a tube down his throat, and his eyes still shut, almost dropping me to the floor. I pulled the chair to his bedside, hanging my head from the shame of dragging him into this madness. I wanted to cry and scream out in anguish at the same time, with my teeth gritted so tightly it made my jaw hurt. I wanted to talk to him, to reassure him that I would help him through whatever lay ahead, but my guilt would not allow the words to pass through my lips. I just sat in silence until the nurse walked in, telling me I couldn't stay any longer. When I left the room, she assured me that he was in good hands and there was nothing else I could do right now, recommending that I head home and get some rest. As much as I wanted to be there for Ted, I couldn't deny she was right. This was well out of my hands, whatever should happen next, but I left my number in case anything should happen before I would return. It was a little after 10 when I reluctantly headed back to my home, my head still heavily zoned out when I walked back into my darkened house. I didn't so much as second guess lifting 2 beers from the fridge, cleaning off the first one in one enthusiastic gulp, popping the cap off the other before dropping into my chair. I hung my head again, rubbing my throbbing temples after setting my drink on the table.
"You missed our appointment,"
A deep voice almost whispered from the darkness, causing me to leap from my chair to flip on the lights. "You?" I said when my eyes met the familiar stranger. "You died. How can you—"
"I did not, my boy,"
the old man who had owned the now defunct back alley bookshop said. "Now this is just another trick," I said, backing away from the man. "Just another trick of that damned lodge."
"I assure you I am quite real. A living and breathing man."
"Bullshit. They pulled your body from the fire."
"It wasn't mine. Alas, it was that of my business partner, the one with whom I owned the shop. Did you ask for me by name, perchance? Or just simply the owner?"
"What? I don't even know your name. I don't know. I don't know what's real anymore." I hadn't even thought of this, that he may not have been the only one who operated the little shop. Still, that didn't explain what the hell he was doing in my house, just sitting in the darkness waiting for me. "How did you get in here?" I asked, anger taking the place of my moment of fear.
"I do apologize for that," he said with a shrug. "I let myself in once I realized you would not be attending our meeting. I came here. It is important, you see, that you hear what I have to say."
"So what? You knocked and I didn't answer, so you just walked in like you owned the fucking place?"
"It was a necessity, I'm afraid. Once I saw the approaching red Cadillac, I could not allow myself to be discovered. Your door was unlocked, and I had little choice in the matter."
"Discovered? By who?"
"Reginald and Thackeray Abernathy. I believe you have met, yes?" after the lengths they were willing to go to destroy my shop. I thought it best that they assumed me to be deceased."
"The dark-haired man?" I asked, mostly to myself.
"Indeed. They have more than a passing obsession with the lodge, my boy."
"So you do know the lodge?" I said, dropping back into my chair and pulling my beer from the table.
"It is no coincidence that you came across my shop, Mr. McConnell, nor that you were led to that very book,"
he said, cutting his eyes to the box I left beside where he sat on the couch. "What is it?" I asked, allowing the insane events that had led me this far to take a backseat to my curiosity. "What is the lodge?"
"That, I believe, is well above our mortal comprehension. That being said, it is very interested in you, dear boy. Very interested indeed. As am I."
"Why? What the hell does that place want from me? This isn't my world. I want no part of that damn place. What it did to Ted,
It is unfortunate what occurred last night, but such is the nature of it when those uninvited should trespass."
"Trespass?" I shouted, getting my feet. "It lured him in. What, he took the bait and suddenly decided it didn't want him? No, I'm done with this shit. I'll have no part of it."
"It was intended for you, dear boy. It is most unfortunate that your friend got in the way of that, but these things do happen. Yes, your associate was led to the door, but only to escort you to it. I am certain that it had no intention of such aggression in keeping him from entering."
I just stared at the man, my face burning from the rage building within me. Not only was he speaking so nonchalantly about Ted barely grasping onto his life, but he acted like it was just a simple inconvenience. "Get out," I said, my voice oozing hatred.
"Do not be so hasty, my boy. I understand that you are upset, but—"
"Get the fuck out of my house or I'll throw you out." He just glared back at me, his expression soft and unsettlingly kind. There was something about that look in his eye that almost made me want to hear him out, but I refused to take part in this any longer. "Look," I said, trying to calm down my racing pulse. "I don't want any part of this anymore. I was curious in the beginning, but this is just too much. Everything I've been through since I heard about that damn place, what it did to Ted, no more." He studied me for a moment, his tired eyes feeling like they could gaze right through me if he wanted.
"Perhaps this is not the right time after all,"
he said, getting to his feet, his knees popping as he straightened his legs.
"But I'm not giving up on you. Not just yet."
I walked to the door, pulling it open, the cool breeze from outside a welcome sensation to my still heated skin. As he gently paced towards the exit, peeking his head around the corner, I assumed to make certain the Abernathy boys were not in sight. He stopped, turning to face me.
"Were I to prove that there was no malicious intent in last night's events, would you be willing to talk with me again?"
he said, a mischievous look in his eyes. "I honestly don't think that would be possible," I said, cutting my gaze beyond the open doorway and back to his weathered face.
Perhaps I will try anyway. A show of good faith, if for no other reason."
With that, he placed his hands behind his back, strolling out into the night. As I made to close the door behind him, he stopped again.
"It's Henry, by the way. Henry Thatch, the youngest son of Harold and Emily Thatch of Birmingham, England. For future reference, to avoid any further confusion."
"That doesn't sound like a Birmingham accent," I said, remaining suspicious of everything he told me. "I'm no expert in linguistics or anything, but I make certain to research these things for my stories these days. In one of my earlier works, I wrote a character who claimed to be from Liverpool, but I had him speaking with a more Cockney slang. Some readers chewed it apart, claiming that the idiotic, lazy writer needs to do more research next time. So yeah, I try to be more familiar with these things now."
"I have not been home in many years, Mr. McConnell. Our voice is a representation of who we are, not who we once were."
I just stared at him with a so what look on my face, silently wishing I'd thought of that trinket of logic a few years back. He just gave me an acknowledging nod before turning back to whatever path he had begun before those parting words. I closed and locked the door, fighting off the temptation to watch and see where he was headed. I was also considering whether I should look into moving someday soon. Far too many oddballs seem to know where I live these days. When I glanced through the window, only seconds after snapping the deadbolt latch, I saw no trace of the soft-spoken old man. I just shook my head at yet another bizarre encounter, pulling the curtain shut once more. Whatever comes next, however he plans to portray the Lodge as some sort of hero in all this, I won't be involved in this anymore. No, I've witnessed the nature of whatever this thing is. I'll never be able to forget that agonized howl of my friend after it deemed him unworthy of entry. I swear I can still hear it now, reverberating against the inside of my skull. I'm done with this investigation, and I refuse to indulge in this madness any longer. All I want now is to escape its clutches. Although I know that it will be no simple task, it being interested in me and all, but I have to find a way out of this, whatever it takes. It's already taken far too much from me, and I will not allow it to take any more, even if I have to find a way to tear it down to its foundation. This whole time I've been on the hunt for answers. No more. Now I just want to break its spell on me and those I care about. I'll burn the painting, that damned book, and anything else that gets in the way of that. I am not playing its game anymore.